Hey there, and welcome back to Badass Branding. We are still in Module 3, Brand Identity, and in this lesson number 2, we're going to go over your brand colors and how to select them. And we'll start with the truth bomb, and that is that poor color selection can damage your brand perception and actually repel your ideal audience. So while it is important to use colors that you are going to feel good about and like, but those colors are also going to have to resonate with your audience as well. So in this lesson, you are going to learn basic color theory and color psychology 101. So we're sort of revisiting 5th grade color psychology and theory. And then we're going to go into how to select your brand anchor color, as well as how to build your color palette out. So color, as we all know, is a very powerful tool in branding. And I've said this 1,000 times, but we process visual 60,000 times faster than we do text. So as you can see, that color will be a super powerful tool as you build out your brand. And it's not just something we use for decoration. There's strategy behind it. So let's look at some basic color theory. We're going back to grade school, so we'll go through this quickly. So color theory 101, on the color wheel, you have your primary colors, yellow, red, and blue. And when you mix those adjacent colors, you're going to get your secondary colors, which are green, purple, and orange. And then you're going to have your tertiary colors, which are going to be the mixtures of those secondary colors. And you're like, okay, well, there's the color wheel. But then when you add white to those colors, you get what they call tints. So that expands the color palette there. And then when you add blacks to those colors, you're going to get what they call shades. So this really opens up the gamut of how many colors you can choose. And then on top of that, if you add equal amounts of black and white, you're going to get tones or saturated colors. I call them tones typically. And so no wonder why so many entrepreneurs get stuck with this, because there are just so many choices, and oftentimes we just kind of fly by the seat of our pants and pick whatever colors we think are good and work together. And then one note here I want to talk about, and this is more of a semantic issue, but there's going to be the difference between hue and color are hue refers to the dominant color family. So when I showed you that color wheel, you had your reds, your greens, your yellows, your purples, oranges, etc. But the color actually describes the specific color that is selected. So when you add, your hue, which is say a family of red with some tints, whether it's whites or if there's some shades, you add some blacks, and then different tones that are applied to that hue, then you get the actual specific color. So you might have a toned down red like a rust color, but that's going to fall into the red hues. Now I use the word color as a general term, but color is the actual color that you will pick, and hue refers to that dominant color family. So I wanted to make sure I got that clear so you understand the difference. But don't worry, we're going to get there, and I know this seems overwhelming, but before we even dive into selecting your colors, we need to understand a little bit of the psychology of color. So color psychology 101 basically says that different colors have different meanings in different contexts and in different cultures. And on top of that, they can actually affect mood and influence decision making. And did you even know that yellows and reds can actually stimulate your appetite and cause you to salivate? And so it's no coincidence that fast food chains often use reds and yellows in their branding. And just to show you, you can look at your McDonald's, In-N-Out, Burger King, Red Robin, etc. You'll see a lot of the fast food restaurants that have reds and yellows. And now this here is a good example of hue versus color. So these are all reds and yellows, but these are all red and yellow hues, but each one of the individual colors are different from each other. So you'll notice that the yellow in Burger King is different than the yellow in In-N-Out. So those colors are different versions of those hues. So just want to get that difference articulated there. So when we look at color meaning and symbolism, they also mean they mean different things in different cultures. These typically are going to be more in Western culture, but then you have your reds, which are going to be sort of excitement and energy, passion, love, and desire, and the list goes on there. And then you have your blues, which are going to be more traditional, security, trust, and loyalty. and yellows are sort of joy, happiness, imagination, helpfulness, etc. And you have your greens, which are going to be sort of your nature, healthy, good luck, money, wealth. Oranges are more active, energy, balance, and enthusiasm, and purples are more associated with royalty or spirituality. It's a kind of represents sensitivity and peacefulness. And again, these are just a small spattering of words that sort of associate with those individual colors. You can look at the PDF of this document, of the slide decks after the fact if you want to look at those. And then you have your neutrals. So your blacks, whites, and browns. Your blacks are going to be, power, sexuality, sophistication, and formality. And white is going to be sort of purity, birth, simple, cleanliness. And you'll notice white in Western culture is usually going to be more purity, like associated with marriage. But in Eastern cultures, white kind of represents death. So you got to be careful on how you use the colors. And then you have your browns, which are sort of your earth tones, and they kind of represent reliability, comfort, endurance, simplicity, etc. So those are some of the overview of some of the meanings of those colors. So you can see why color is so complex and has so much meaning. So this is one of the most common struggles I hear online entrepreneurs have. How do I pick my color palette? How do I pick my color palette? So I see you got to map it. And what I mean by that, and this is when we're going to go back to our personality exercise that we did in a previous module, and then you're going to map those 3 to 5 most desirable personality traits to a color that has a corresponding or a similar trait. So go back to those 3 to 5 traits or attributes you had that you want to convey, those personality attributes, and map it to the corresponding color. And then one of these colors are going to end up most likely being your primary brand color or hue. We'll get into tints and shades as we move forward. Things to consider when you're selecting your primary brand or anchor color, as I call it, and that is going to be those personality traits that we talked about, but also think about your core values. There are many online entrepreneurs that lead with faith, so maybe how is that going to affect the colors that you use? Think about the moods of the colors. Some of them are going to be dark and strong and powerful, and others are going to be softer and lighter and airier. So think about those, and then also think about what is going to resonate with your audience. So this is when you start doing your ideal customer avatar or your audience persona. Think about what's going to resonate with them as well, and kind of cross-reference all of these things as you pick out your color. So one reminder here when we're doing this, and this is one of the reasons why, aside from having so many options, that others get stuck on doing this, is that they try to do too much with just color. So you have to remember that you can't and you shouldn't rely solely on a color to represent all of the attributes of your personality and your business. This is just one facet of your brand. So don't get hung up on this. Pick one of those top 3 brand personality traits that you want to represent in your brand, because there are going to be other things like your copy, your messaging, your visual design that are going to help articulate other aspects of your brand. So now let's look at building out your color palette. So your color palette is going to be a collection of anywhere from 2 to 6 colors that you will use in all of your branding. The more colors you use, the more challenging it becomes. So when you're starting out, I always suggest to use fewer colors. But now that you have a few options for that primary brand color, let's use that one color and apply it to some of these color models on how to build out your palette. So how do we do that? And that's going to be these 6 different color models, which essentially these are just a method for creating harmonious color palettes based on the color wheel. So the first one that we have is called Monochromatic. This is when it's one color, or one hue, should I say, on the color wheel with tints or shades or tones. And this is typically the easiest to work with because you only have one color. You don't have to worry about another color that's going to clash with it. These are a couple of examples of monochromatic color schemes, so Oreo and Animal Planet. Next up, you have analogous color schemes. This is when you're going to have 2 to 3 adjacent colors on the color wheel. And again, incorporating tints, shades, and tones, because that gives you a wider gamut of options to choose from and gives you different, just different overall tone to the color. This is relatively simple to use. It can be challenging, but typically these colors are very harmonious and don't clash with each other. And some examples, as you can see here, are BP with the greens and the yellows and the sort of the lime green. And then you have the Tostitos, which are, you know, reds, oranges, and yellows. And then you have your MasterCard, again, red, orange, and yellow, but just different colors on the color wheel. And even my own personal branding is an analogous color scheme. So you can see my colors there, which fall on the blue to the purplish pink side of things. And then you can see it in action there in my video show key artwork. Next up, you have complementary. This is when you have 2 opposite colors on the color wheel. And again, incorporating tints, shades, and tones. This can be simple, but it can also be challenging, especially if like green or red is one of your anchor colors. You know, so if you have a green as your anchor color and red is the complement to that, you have to be real careful not to make it look Christmassy, right? Because we have those things ingrained into our culture that might make you think of something else. So this is when it's important to experiment with tints and shades. And some examples are Mountain Dew and FedEx. And again, you can see here that blue on the FedEx is more on like the purplish side, right? So it's the hue is in the blue family, but the color is specific to that. And also complementary colors. This is the reason why the Hulk are his colors. And again, as I mentioned, it's the reason why Christmas is red and green. And then next up, we have split complementary. Now, these become a little bit more complex. This is when you have basically 3 main color hues on the color wheel where 2 colors adjacent to the opposite color. So you can see there in a little diagram on how that would work out. Again, tints, shades, and tones. It can be a little more challenging, but again, these are all designed to be harmonious. So it all depends in the actual color you choose, meaning what tints, shades, and tones you use, and to what ratio of the colors you use, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And some examples of split complementary are, you know, Fanta and Burger King. So next up, we have the Triadic color scheme, and this is when there's 3 colors that are like equidistant on the color wheel. Again, tints, shades, and tones. It's a little more challenging, but again, it all comes down to experimentation. Remember, these are sort of guidelines to get you started. And some examples of Triadic are your Taco Bell and your Tides, and you can see there. And then lastly, we have the Tetratic, and this is when there's 4 colors that are equidistant on the color wheel, or at least in the shape of a square or a rectangle. And again, 10 shades and tones. And this can be a lot more challenging because really the more color options you have, the more challenging it is to make it more distinctive, because you got to be careful then, unless your branding is sort of rainbow colors and things like that, it can be real challenging to do that. And some examples of Tetratic are going to be your Googles and your Microsoft. And these are actually the same hues, but just different individual colors, right? So Google has red, as does Microsoft. They both have the blue, the yellow, and the red. It's just those specific colors of those hues that differentiate. And then even our own Bobby Klink has a tetratic color scheme, which are going to be the oranges, yellows, purples, and the turquoise. But you'll notice also, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, a lot of his branding is going to be these neutrals, the charcoal gray or blacks and the whites. And this is also a reason why so many people get hung up on colors, is because they think that they should use their main colors so much it becomes too much. So you really want to stick mostly with your neutrals, and then you're going to have a spattering of your main brand colors. And like I was saying here a moment ago, be sure to use neutrals in your color palette, the grays, the off-whites, and soft tones of a color to act as sort of backgrounds and large portions of your color. Because if you use your main color for everything, it's too much. You want that color to stand out, so you need those neutrals to juxtapose against the actual color, so that way that color stands out more. And like I was saying here, do not use all colors equally, right? You're going to have your neutrals, you're going to have your primary color or colors, depending on the color model you use, and then you're going to have an accent color or a color that is like a CTA color, a call to action color. This is sort of an action color that you would use for buttons and highlights and texts and graphics and things like that. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm referring to using them different ratios. I use the 60-30-10 rule. So when using your color palettes in your design, be sure to use this ratio of color, which is going to be 60% neutrals, 30% that primary brand color or colors, depending on the model that you use, and then 10% for your accent colors. Again, call to actions, buttons, highlights of words, things you want people to take action on. And so if we look at Bobby's color palette in the 60-30-10 ratio, you see you have your neutrals on the top there. You got your turquoise, purple, orange, and yellow. And then when you apply that 60-30-10, you have most of everything is going to be the neutrals, and then you have a spattering of the brand colors. Now Bobby's is a little bit challenging because he does use the Tetratic, so some of those colors can be interchangeable, but most of what you will see in his branding is like his call to action is going to be that orange, because most of his buttons and things that he wants you to do are going to be in the orange. So that's the call to action color or the accent color. And just to recap, these are the 6 different color schemes you can use as you're building out your color palette, from that one color that you choose as an anchor color from the exercise we did in the personality exercise, and then you build that out based on the color scheme that you choose. And just a reminder, as you get to those, the split complementary or the triadic or the tetratic, it does get more challenging. So I highly recommend, if you're starting out or if you're fresh, just stick to those top 3 monochromatic, analogous, or complementary color schemes, because they're going to be a lot easier to use in the beginning. And as time goes on and as your brand evolves, you can incorporate more color. In fact, that's what we did for Bobby's brand. Bobby's brand used to be just orange and charcoal. And I ended up working with Bobby to where we expanded that color palette and how it's used throughout his brand. And one other just little reminder here, these are just guidelines, right? These are not hard, fast rules. You don't have to follow these exactly. You don't, like, if a complementary color does not have to be exactly directly across from the other color. It can be slightly off to the left or to the right when you're looking at the color wheel. So let's look at some color resources that I use to help me build out color palettes. So use some of these online color palette tools to help you narrow down your exact colors. And that's going to be coolers.co, Design Seeds, color.adobe.com. And then, of course, there's other just visual research tools like Pinterest, which is great, Google, and, of course, Canva. So my favorite color palette building tool is coolers.co, and this just really gives you a ton of options on how to specifically choose your color palette, but it also helps you to the point to where you can actually select colors based on those models, or you can select color palettes based on those models that we talked about, like analogous, monochromatic, and complementary. So if you start with your main color, add some tints and shades to it to get it more narrowed down to that specific color, and then apply the monochromatic or analogous color scheme to that color, and it'll give you options that you can cycle through. You can edit them. It's really an amazing tool, and I use it almost every day. And then there's Design Seeds, and this is this is more of a color research tool. It doesn't build palettes for you per se, but you can search color palettes based on a photograph. So you see there the orange is the photograph of oranges. They actually extract the color palette from that photo. So if you have some brand photos, you can upload your image to either here Design Seeds or coolers.co and extract a color palette from that brand photo. So this is a really fun site to view as well. And then, of course, there's Canva. You can use Canva to actually build out your palette. They don't really have prefabbed palettes per se, so you would really need to know what color scheme you're going to be using to work on that. And then one tip when you're building your color palette. Now, we haven't really selected our fonts yet, but when you're building your color palette, create a document like this, whether it's in Google Slides or PowerPoint, or if you use the Adobe software, or even in Canva, which Canva is probably the best bet. But create a little layout like this so you can start to test the colors to see how they work in actual context. So you do 4 boxes, and then you can, once you get your color palette rolling out, you can say, well, what does this color look like against another color? What does it look like against black? What does it look like against white? How does this font text color look against the yellow in this case? So when you do this, this really shows you sometimes colors don't work well together. And that's okay in your branding as long as they're not like on top of each other. So again, it's an experimentation. There's no right or wrong way. Without the experimentation, you're never really going to know how it's going to look in the end. So that's a good tip for that. And then once you narrow down your color palette to however many colors you're going to choose, this is going to require some decisions here. But once you've settled on those exact colors, you're going to need to jot down your hex codes for each color, or hexadecimal is what it stands for. And that hex code is essentially the 6-digit alphanumeric code that is that unique identifier of that color. So this is what I was talking about, the specific color of a hue. So in this case, that 28AAE1 in the example here is the specific color of the blue hue. So it's a blue, but it's that specific color. And again, one warning as you are researching and looking through other brands for inspiration, it's okay to research other brands and derive that inspiration from their color palettes, from their designs and things like that. But remember, you want to differentiate yourself, so don't flat out copy a color palette of a competitor or somebody else, or don't flat out copy a design for that matter. Design is meant to inspire, so you can, or the research is meant to inspire. So as you do that research, you can say, oh, I like how those 2 colors work together, or maybe I like an example of the ratio of colors they have in their palette, or I like how this color family works together. So think about those things as you're researching, but don't just flat out copy. So now I want you to take action. So go ahead through those exercises. If you need to go back to the video or the slide deck, go ahead and do that. Pick your anchor colors based on those personality traits and your audience and your values, and apply the different color schemes to them as we went over, and use those color resources to help you. And don't forget to experiment and add tints and shades to get some variety of different colors and sort of moods for those colors. And just remember to experiment and have some fun. And then definitely spend some time on this. This is not something you're going to do in 10 minutes. You need to spend some time on it, do a little bit of research, think about your personality traits and the colors that are associated with those traits, and experiment with those colors. And again, have fun. So that's it for this lesson. So just to recap, we went over basic color theory and psychology 101. We went over how to select that brand anchor color, and we talked about how to build out your color palette using various tools. So in the next lesson, we are going to now go over how to nail your brand fonts. We'll see you in the next lesson.